Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. 10 hours of debate. That's how long it took this UCP government to dismantle democracy and embrace corruption. Today's passage of Bill 22 is a black mark on this Premier, this Cabinet, and every single private member who voted for it. Maybe you can just hold that, okay? Let's be clear on what happened. The UCP Premier saw his party operatives and insiders being investigated for fraud, forgery, and illegal donations in a leadership race tied to his campaign. So he drafted legislation to effectively circumvent that independent investigation by terminating the investigator. In legislation, using his power as Premier. Jason Kenney has turned the Assembly into a bully pulpit, using the power entrusted to him by the people of Alberta for his own personal, partisan, and political gain. It is the most disgusting abuse of power in the history of Alberta. It proves this Premier is corrupt and that his cabinet and his private members are complicit. When the government introduced Bill 22 in the Legislative Assembly on Monday, the Premier skipped town to avoid questions. Then the government said they would invoke closure to rush debate, to blindside the public, and to try to silence criticism. No time for the public to understand the bill. No time for the media to ask questions. No time for our opposition to write amendments. These are the actions of a Premier and a government consumed by power and unconcerned by the views of Albertans. Earlier this week, the Elections Commissioner himself reminded us that the purpose of his office is to prevent a culture of corruption in our politics. By passing this bill, I can only assume that the Premier and his caucus are united behind that culture of corruption. Our caucus vowed to do everything in our power to fight against this bill and stand up for Alberta's democracy. We moved to amend the bill to ensure the Commissioner's work would continue uninterrupted and uncompromised. And the UCP voted it down. We wrote the Lieutenant Governor and requested that she refuse to sign this legislation into law. We called for emergency meetings at multiple committees, and we asked the Ethics Commissioner to force multiple members of Cabinet and the entire UCP caucus to recuse themselves from this vote for the obvious conflict of interest at play. So it's this last strategy that I want to seek to update you on today. At about 9:30 a.m., contrary to the assurances in the media of the UCP House Leader just yesterday, hardly surprising, the UCP invoked their closure motion to limit all further debate on this bill to 1 hour. At just after 10 a.m., my office received a response from the Ethics Commissioner outlining that it is possible that one or more UCP members may be in conflict were they to vote on this bill, in breach of Alberta's conflict of interest legislation. So we received that response from the Ethics Commissioner, and it casts serious doubts on the passage of third reading today. In her letter, the Ethics Commissioner confirms that any MLA or executive member currently under investigation by the Elections Commissioner or, and this is important, with close associates under investigation by the Elections Commissioner would likely be in contravention of conflicts of interest legislation in this province if they vote on this bill. Secondly, she notes that the individual circumstances of the MLAs who have been interviewed by the RCMP, people such as the Justice Minister, the Infrastructure Minister, the Culture Minister, the Senior and Housing Minister, the Associate Minister of Health and Addictions, and even more UCP MLAs, should have spoken with her about their connection with the RCMP before voting on the bill, as they too could be in contravention of the conflict of interest legislation in Alberta. Lastly, she notes that she has not had enough time to consider whether all UCP MLAs have some level of conflict with regard to this bill. As a result of receiving this letter just after 10 a.m., at 10:28 a.m., our members rose and they moved to adjourn debate on this bill, roughly 3 minutes before it would have been voted. They then, however, the UCP chose to vote against this motion to adjourn. Instead, they proceeded to vote Bill 22 through. That means this legislation passing today could be a complete and utter contravention of fundamental ethics rules for all MLAs on the governing side of this House. We gave the UCP an opportunity to delay this vote so they could check their potential conflicts with the Ethics Commissioner, so she could fully investigate what is an unprecedented opportunity for conflict and corruption in this House. They rejected that opportunity. There is no telling how many illegal votes were cast today. This bill should not have passed today, period. It also should not ever have been rushed by the government. But sadly, it is not clear whether any of the members on the government side understand or even care about their ethical standing as elected members. This is a serious situation with serious ethical questions left unanswered. We have many questions, and we will be asking all of them in due course. We will be assessing all further options to fight this legislation. As of now, it is, however, unclear what happens next. But what is clear is this, is that by firing the election commissioner while he is in the middle of an investigation into fraud, forgery, illegal donations within the UCP, the Premier has betrayed the trust of Albertans. The legislature is not a tool for him to undercut democracy, avoid accountability, and hide the truth. This is not what he promised people, not even close. He does not have a mandate to bring corruption back to Alberta. Bill 22 sets a very, very dangerous precedent that Jason Kenney will overrule the will of the people in order to enforce his own with no regard to the rule of law. It is the first and surest sign that this party, founded with the sole mission of pursuing power, is now so consumed by it that they will let no one stand in their way. Albertans need to know this behavior is dangerous. It calls into question whether we have a government dedicated to doing the right thing, or something far worse. So there is a saying, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. The people of Alberta need to decide whether they will let Jason Kenney corrupt their province. Absolutely. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions. We will file multiple complaints with the Ethics Commissioner now that the bill has been voted through. I certainly hope that her office survives the investigation process. And I only say that partially humorously, because every single person who is called upon to hold this government to account now will fear because of what we've just seen. So it's not actually amusing. So we will file multiple requests that every single person who voted on this bill be investigated for conflict of interest, and we will also file them with respect to the Premier, because of course through his role on Executive Council he has engaged very actively in the deliberations on this bill to date. And I think it's fairly clear that the Ethics Commissioner, by suggesting that people with close associates who might be under investigation ought not to have been part of this, I would argue that if we don't see a record that the Premier has formally recused himself from Cabinet deliberations on this bill, that he's in breach of the Conflict of Interest Act.
Rachel, can you provide some context? You've been around here longer than any other MLA. Can you think of another example where a bill of this consequence and complexity has passed so quickly, basically in 2.5 days?
No, we have never seen anything like this. You know, when we were in government, we once introduced a motion to potentially use closure. We never actually used it. Over 4 years, this government's used it multiple times since May. But more to the point, you're absolutely right. This was an omnibus bill, something that he's imported from his time working with Stephen Harper, someone who was well known for his efforts to reduce the time that bills would be debated in Parliament. And it includes many substantive features. Obviously, it includes an attack on the pensions of hundreds of thousands of Albertans, which is again, something he never talked about in the last election. It includes the elimination of certain boards and agencies, the oldest freestanding board in the history of the province, the elimination of Sports Connection, and among other things, apparently not funding the Special Olympics, as well as additional changes with respect to financing between the PC party, the UCP, and the Wild Rose, which is another thing that, again, we haven't had the time to even dig into yet. So there are many things in this, and 2.5 days is an absolutely illegitimate amount of time over which we can debate a bill of this consequence. So it's a really, really sad day for this province and for people who respect what should be happening within this building. It's unlikely that I will be today. I'm hoping to figure out our plan to come back next week. We will be talking about the budget next week and the many heartless, cruel cuts that are being made to subsidize the $4.7 billion corporate handout. And so I look forward to being able to come back for that. But we're still looking at exactly what the rules are in terms of what needs to happen for me to come back. Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I did hear back from the Lieutenant Governor pretty much as I was walking over to come here, and she is not going to intervene. So that is very disappointing. She will only meet with the Premier. She will not meet with me. So that is very disappointing news for all Albertans. As for the committees, I think we're still waiting to hear back on some of them. We will see what the timing is, how quickly the bill is proclaimed, and how quickly Mr. Gibson is removed from his office such that he is unable to speak to members on the record at the committee meetings next week.
Anyone else? Thanks.
Okay, thank you.